Okay, hi everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. It's a good turnout for a Monday after a very disruptive weekend for many of you, I know. So I'm very pleased to introduce Christian Wells to you today. I invited him to come join us because he's working on a really amazing interdisciplinary team at the University of South Florida, which is well known internationally as having one of the best or the best applied anthropology program in the country. He's been working with a team of engineers on a whole series of grant-funded projects, very well-funded EPA, NSF-funded projects on wastewater infrastructure and sanitation infrastructure, primarily in developing communities or underserved communities in a wide variety of national and international contexts. So we'll be learning more from him about how to work well in interdisciplinary groups and about the differences in thinking that folks from many different scientific backgrounds have and how we can join those together in interests of the populations we're trying to serve. What some of you may not know is that Christian is trained as an anthropologist, and his dissertation was archaeology and ethnographic anthropology. So he had an ethnographic component and an archaeological component. A lot of his work in the past has been associated with soils, so soil analysis and archaeological field sites. I pulled out some of these titles, which are just fantastic. Sampling design and inferential bias in archaeological soil chemistry, quantitative modeling of soil chemical data from inductively coupled plasma, optimal emission I can't even say all this. Optical emission spectroscopy. Is that how you say it? Yeah. Reveals evidence of cooking and eating in ancient Mesoamerican plazas. Unfortunately, we're not going to hear about that today, but we will be hearing quite a bit about wastewater and the challenges and the promises of working in interdisciplinary teams. I did just want to mention also that one of the great things about having Christian here is that he and his team have been incredibly successful in applying for these grants. And I think that the grant that we're going to hear the most about today is a PIRE grant, which it stands for Partnership for International Research and Education. And this was on context-sensitive implementation of synergistic water energy systems. So we will look forward to hearing about that. And I guess I should tell everyone your title and those things. I should have done that first, but somehow I'm doing it last. So Christian is a professor of anthropology and the director of the Center for Brownfields Research and Redevelopment at the University of South Florida. And it's also worth noting that he was the founding director, no longer, but the founding director of the Office of Sustainability and the deputy director of the Patel College for Global Sustainability. So a lot of really shared interests with what we're trying to do here at the Mitchell Center. So Dr. Wells, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to learn from you and appreciate you coming all the way to chilly Maine. Okay.
How is everybody? Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. It's really nice to see everybody. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. I love the weather here. I've been joking with people during my visit that it's finally gotten cool in Tampa, where I'm from, where South Florida's from. It's like below 90 degrees now, so. And that's about as low as it's going to get. It's not that bad, but I really enjoyed my stay, and I appreciate Dr. Eisenhower. Thank you for asking me to come up, and thanks to the Mitchell Center for hosting this.
Oh, yes, and the Anthropology and Engineering co-sponsors.
Oh, excellent.
Thank you for that. Yeah,
Awesome.
Sorry, everybody.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you. So I am an anthropologist. I'm actually an applied anthropologist, which means I work with communities to help them solve problems that they have, and problems that are social and cultural in nature, or have social and cultural solutions to those kind of problems. And most of my work is at the interface of human and environmental health, and looking at how the environment around you impacts your health, and vice versa. So Cindy asked me to talk a little bit today about the interdisciplinary research team that I work with, and then to give an example from this recent National Science Foundation grant that just wrapped up. It was a 6-year project that just wrapped up this year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, if that sounds okay. And usually I'm a walker. I'm walking all over the place and animated, but I think I have to stay put for the camera and the audio, so I'm going to try to resist the urge, so you might see me shake this desk a little bit. Before I begin, though, I wanted to show you a very short, I think it's a 7-minute film that we did for an NSF video competition that describes the nature of our research team and that features some of our students. And the title of the talk, Spaghetti and Waffle Thinking, will become obvious to you once you see the film. It's a big joke that we have. So I'm going to attempt to do some technology. Never works for me, but let's see. Oh, awesome. Right. Cool. Let's see if the sound works. It's a little quiet. Turn it up.
Engineers have brains that are kind of like waffles, so that we're all compartmentalized. Circuits in one spot, so then it flows over to the other spot, so that's how we think of problems. So you do this, optimize, good. Do this, good. The anthropologists have brains like spaghetti. One strand of spaghetti starts here, and then there's big mass and mingle, and then here it is up here. And I love working with these two disciplines, but it definitely makes for like a bit of difficulty having, a spaghetti brain whenever I'm talking to engineers, or a waffle brain whenever I'm talking to anthropologists.
So I'm co-principal investigator on 2 large National Science Foundation grants. One is the Partnerships for International Research and Education that aims to train graduate students and young career professionals in both anthropology and engineering and other disciplines to work together on large international kinds of development projects.
So the project is really about training researchers, which includes our graduate students, and we sort of focus it as, water, energy, nutrient nexus with global competency training in various countries around the world.
That process of pairing anthropologists and engineers grows out of the experience that many of us have as professionals working with professional anthropologists and engineers. We thought that it would be good to do it with students who are learning their skills and are even more open to new ideas. So in the field we have engineering students and we have anthropology students living and working together.
So when I was in the field doing research in Belize, I lived with Ambitus. We shared a tiny bedroom, so we had a lot of together time, just close quarters.
So my first opportunity to work closely was actually in Belize a few summers ago, where I was living with another anthropologist as well as an environmental engineer. And that was an incredible experience.
I love working with anthropologists. They always complicate things, but in a good way. I appreciate the complexity. I do complex models, so I appreciate it, but good gravy. Sometimes as an engineer, I'm like, just let me simplify a little bit, just a little bit. So it's that balance. I think a good thing that I always kind of bring back to engineering is that need for context and like bringing in complexity, bringing in the human element. That's important.
By collaborating with engineers like Christy, I really got more exposure to the technical operations of systems, like wastewater systems, so I could be more knowledgeable in talking to people about them and how they might use it differently or perceive those systems differently than I wouldn't have had a grounding in if I had just come back from my own field of specialization, which is more heritage studies and tourism development.
Anthropology sometimes spends a little bit too much time critiquing and analyzing and not enough time actually implementing solutions because we're worried that something might go wrong or that it might not be perfect. It's complicated, we like to say. And engineers, I think, sometimes are a little bit too eager to implement the solution without really identifying whether or not it can be sustainable. So I think bringing those two disciplines together is hugely important, and I know greatly changed the way that I work on projects.
I think it's important for engineers and anthropologists to work in interdisciplinary settings because we're both working towards making communities more sustainable.
Well, we quite often have good intentions when we go out and we try to find solutions to communities' problems. And we go into it really desperately wanting to help people, but if we don't consider all aspects of the community, then quite often those solutions don't work. And we also don't get community buy-in, I think, for a lot of solutions. Good solutions that really, they're designed well, they make sense, they're logically going to work, and they just don't. And they don't because you don't consider the people. And that, I think, is the big key as to why it's important to have not just anthropologists, but social scientists in general, trying to fill in the gaps that other disciplines may not be able to.
A lot of times, engineers are going into international development. They're the people who are contracted to put in a wastewater system or, let's say, some new energy network. But when we think about sustainable development, people come into the picture, no matter. They're going to be the ones who are using the system, yes, whether we're energy, water, sanitation. They're going to be the ones using it. But they're also, the people in the community should be the ones sustaining it. And so if we can look at, as engineers, people not just as kind of the end product, but also as the stewards of the infrastructure that we're putting in, then we're moving forward.
Also, anthropologists, I think, have to look at their work in slightly more concrete terms. And so not everything can be a research question. Sometimes you have to actually provide solutions to some of these contexts. And so I think that's what we bring as engineers. We have to look at the problem and be able to bring some sort of solution to the table.
We have been engaged in a lot of this research, simultaneously a lot of talking about how wonderful it is that this synergy between anthropology and environmental engineering exists, and the complementarities that both groups bring to one another. It's got to be time now where we step away from continuing to talk about it, continuing to have these conversations, and actually start working on interdisciplinary publications, interdisciplinary research, interdisciplinary projects that are aimed specifically for the public.
Yay! All right, I'm not a filmmaker, but I appreciate your patience. All right. So what do you think? Spaghetti and waffle thinking. I think Christy had it right with spaghetti, that our anthropologists' brains are like, going all over the place, and then one little idea comes out this way. And initially our experience with engineers was kind of like the waffle thinking, where they're very compartmentalized, the system is very clearly defined, and things are step by step, and you just try to be as most efficient as you can. And so having students live together and learn from each other, sometimes they kind of mush the spaghettis and the waffles together. And that's kind of what we intended to do with this sort of experiment. So we're a group we call ourselves Reclaim, and you can find out more about us at usf-reclaim.org. We're a group now that's been together almost 10 years, and we're about 100 graduate and undergraduate students and about 15 or so faculty in anthropology, engineering, and public health. And we work together on just a series of research and graduate and undergraduate training projects, all with the idea of reclaiming resources from wastes. And so a lot of different student projects are interested in reclaiming resources from wastes. And we go out and the anthropologists go out and work with engineers in the field. They help them take samples. They learn how to do things like analyzing those samples for water quality parameters. And we work with them in the lab. We try to embed anthropology students with groups and teams of engineers so that they can learn from each other, not just in a classroom setting or a seminar setting, but together in the field, doing something active. And all of this is united by interests that faculty and students have with creating interventions into what engineers call the sanitation value chain. And normally this process of the creation of human waste, the transportation and treatment of human waste, and then releasing it back into the environment often brings with it sometimes environmental challenges and environmental health problems. And so what the team, the Reclaim team, is interested in doing is closing the loop. Is taking that waste and recovering resources from it. So the idea is that instead of discharging treated sewage into rivers, lakes, and oceans where it compromises human environmental health, we can come up with technologies to safely recover water. You've heard of water recycling and water reuse. Also nutrients, a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus are in human waste, and then embodied energy for beneficial uses, especially agriculture, energy, recreation, industry, drought, a whole variety of applications. And how did we do this? I was speaking with the materials group earlier, and these are some of the ways that we started this process. We worked as faculty groups, and we lived together for about a week at a time in a couple of long-term seminars, first at the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe, and then later at the Institute of Advanced Study in Durham University in the UK, which we enjoyed greatly being in the UK, because if you're a Harry Potter fan, this is where they filmed a lot of the inside scenes and the great banquet hall and everything. We got to eat in there. It was so cool. So by us living together and working together over a long period of time, we got to know each other's language and we got to understand each other. And that was really beneficial because, you know, at the end of a seminar like this, we had environmental engineers talking about neoliberalism and hegemony. And we had anthropologists talking about pathogen removal from wastewater effluent. So we really got to know each other's language and what each other's sort of worldview is, because they're very, very different worldviews. If you're studying to be an engineer, in the United States anyway, the focus always is on efficiencies, right? Because efficiencies will drop costs and raise benefits. Anthropologists are all about the cultural context and all about different ways that people understand and value resources. And so they're just very, very different worldviews. And so getting together and talking about it and sharing it and recognizing that you have different worldviews has been really influential for us. So we sort of decided early on 4 basic principles of what we call integrated interdisciplinary collaboration. And these were simply short statements that we all agreed are really important for us to work together. So the first one is, and it sounds like a no-brainer, but it took us a long time to come up with this one. Anthropology and engineering provide complementary perspectives that yield convergent research. So when we first started our research together, we thought that we should all become very cosmopolitan and transdisciplinary. We should throw out the idea that there is a separate environmental engineering and throw out the idea that there's an anthropology and just focus on the research question itself. And that was a total failure. It didn't work at all. We needed to recognize that anthropologists are good at being anthropologists and environmental engineers are good at being environmental engineers. So we should follow our specialties. And we should figure out the specific ways that we complement each other. And so that idea of complementarity became a really important structuring principle for our relationship together. The second one is that engineered systems that seek to maximize efficiency can fail when infrastructures are embedded in social and cultural institutions. Now this sentence is a big one. It's packed with lots of ideas, so I'm going to unpack it a little bit. So in the sort of the global north, a lot of infrastructure is embedded in the marketplace, right? Like I was saying, efficiencies, you pursue efficiencies to reduce costs and increase benefits. And that's because they're embedded in the marketplace and that logic of the market. But outside of the global north, say in the global south, in low and moderate HDI and developing countries, a lot of these kinds of infrastructures are embedded in social and cultural institutions. For example, kinship. Water systems, for example, where we work in Honduras, are embedded in kinship systems. And so decisions about how the infrastructure is created and who gets what water when, it's not about efficiencies at all, but it's all about who you know and who you don't want to piss off because your sister's mother is going to marry your next door neighbor's brother. And you've got to be really cognizant of these kinship relationships. And so decisions are made based on a social or a cultural institution and not based on market efficiencies. A very famous one in anthropology, for the anthropologists in the room, Steve Lansing has studied water distribution systems in Bali. And that water distribution system that he studied is embedded in religious institutions. And so religious practitioners make decisions that map onto cosmology and religion about who should get water when. So when you step out of the United States in a context you're familiar with, or outside of Europe, you see that infrastructure systems and processes are organized very differently around the world. And this specific thinking about efficiencies all the time doesn't always work. And you end up with failed development projects again and again. All right. The third one is human behavior is not motivated by incentives and sanctions. And that just means that a lot of times when we talked with our colleagues in engineering, there was a desire to change someone's behavior, to get them to do something. And you needed to incentivize them to do something because the assumption is they're either lazy or they're not knowledgeable or they have a different value system and you needed to change their value system. So if you could just come up with an incentive or a sanction to kind of push their behavior, a carrot and a stick, that'll get people to behave in a certain way you want them to behave, right? And we see that all the time with a lot of policies in the US. However, the complementary perspective from anthropology is that there are structural, like embedded in society, the way society works, or intersectional, the way different aspects of your identity, your race, your class, and your gender combine, that constrains or enables your behavior in certain settings, and that these kinds of constraints operate differently across different stakeholder groups. In other words, the same kind of incentive or sanction that you might apply to one stakeholder group might be a total failure to another stakeholder group because they're of a different race or ethnicity, or a different socioeconomic class, or different gender. And so if we can recognize these kinds of what we call intersectional differences among stakeholder groups, we can better prepare for understanding when sanctions and incentives might fail or succeed. All right, I know this is a lot of jargon, so I'll try to calm it down a little. The last one, and this is sort of that inspires the title of the talk, Diversity Improves Design. What we mean by that is diversity not just in terms of people and backgrounds and identities, but also perspectives. Moving toward a more multifocal or holistic kind of perspective, we find improves sustainability design solutions. And it does this because when you do this, it embeds equitability into sustainability. Right? You can't have a long-term sustainable solution if it's not equitable. If people that are being affected by whatever design you're creating are not in the driver's seat, what we like to say in the development world, if they're not at the table, then they're probably on the menu, right? You've got to include the people that are being affected by this design if you want to make it equitable and sustainable over the long term. And two sort of methods that are examples of this that we use in our research are known as community-based participatory action research. This is a mode of research and certain strategies that I'll talk about that really developed in the 1970s to promote equitability. And the other is what we call precision interventions or context-sensitive interventions, where we really understand the social and cultural context of the community that we're working in so that we can affect an intervention that makes sense and it's very specific. All right. I'm going to take a quick break for questions, and I built in several breaks for questions because it can be really hard to sit down and listen to me blabber on and on for however long. So, questions about our research team. And feel free to ask anything. This is just a nice break for me to not talk so much. Yes, 2 hands up.
I'm stretching, I'm sorry.
Nope, you don't get out of it easy that way. Yes.
So you said that you went for transdisciplinary and that failed.
The idea that our students should know a little bit about everything, but they shouldn't be a specialist in anything.
So how did you recover from that failure? Because sometimes early on in a group, that kind of approach would just, okay, this doesn't work. Let's all go back to our disciplinary silos.
And that's what we did. We went back to our disciplinary silos and said, hey, I'm not so bad at what I should be good at. How can we come up with a way to work together instead of trying to just dilute everything that we know and think of research problems as being outside of silos or outside of disciplines? Sometimes disciplinary research is good. You just have to find the ways that they complement each other. And that's the process that we did by living together, working together, talking to each other. It's not a really good answer, but it's the one I've got. Yes?
Have you thought about any political intervention while we are trying to do an interdisciplinary engineering to villages or any other community?
Political intervention?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? That sounds interesting.
Local politics, or if you wanted to implement certain things in your region, it's local. There's if a religious group is there, or you wanted to have, which is really driven by certain groups, you wanted to do like engineering structure or any kind of implementation, but you have also a local political intervention that really do not allow you to implement the
Yes, all the time. All of the projects that we end up doing, at the end of the day, it's all about political economy. It's all about politics and money. And you've really got to, as an anthropologist, we live in a certain place and become part of the community over a long period of time, over years, before we understand how politics and economics intersect in the success or failure of development projects. And so that's always absolutely on our mind, these kinds of interventions by politicians. And there's no recipe for dealing with it. It's different in every case. That's what makes it sort of a context-sensitive solution. Yes?
So are the projects, your project, but are the projects brought to communities, or are they, is there some internal driver that is kind of making decisions and steering this group in a particular direction?
That's a great question, because a lot of traditional university-based research, you have a lot of demands on you and coming up with research projects and going out and doing things. But in applied research, the community members are in the driver's seat, and you have to take your hands off the wheel. So it's really, we work with certain communities that we have relationships with, and already there's a communication conduit. But we found in working with this engineering group, we work with, as Jean knows, Engineers Without Borders. And that's an organization that's on a lot of university campuses, and communities through that international organization will contact universities and say, hey, we have this water, sanitation, or hygiene problem. Is there anything you can do to help us? And so that's been a really useful conduit, is organizations like Engineers Without Borders. And we've also developed these same kinds of relationships with communities through the U.S. Peace Corps. And we have a lot of operatives that work through Peace Corps that then contact us and invite us into communities. All right, yes?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
You talked about engineers doing cost-benefit analysis.
Oh,
you
yes.
talked about the anthropologists being focused on how different groups of people value things differently. How much of the intersection between anthropology and engineering is trying to widen the things that are plugged into cost-benefit analyses?
That is a great entree into my next section.
Oh, well, you came in later.
No, the whole thing is about just that, so I'm going to answer you with a lecture.
Great, just for me.
I put this together for you in anticipation of that question. No, it's absolutely core and central, because so many what they call sustainable solutions are through these footprinting technologies of cost-benefit analyses, life cycle assessment, life cycle costing, environmental site assessment, and so on. And that's been really important, and that's the whole raison d'etre of the talk. So let me tell you about the case study that involves this kind of cost-benefit analyses, and this is what Cindy mentioned. This is the NSF PIRE, or Partnerships for International Research and Education, project that we had for the past 6 years that you learned about in the video. And specifically, this is to address the SDGs 9, 11, and 13. And the question is, that our big research question, how can effective, geographically appropriate, and culturally relevant engineered systems be established to utilize wastewater as a resource for recovery of energy, water, and nutrients? And very important to this is the scalability of technologies from individual household, community, urban, and global. So scalability is really important. And we had a number of partners in Central America and the Caribbean, and a number of laboratories that we worked with in Europe. So we would go and visit each other's labs, visit each other's field sites. We were in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Belize, which is what I'll talk about today, Costa Rica, Panama, and Bolivia. We had the same type of field sites. Again, Engineers Without Borders, and most of those, except for one, contacted our university for help. So I'm going to focus on Belize, in particular southern Belize, if anyone's been to Belize. No, Greg has. If you haven't, go. It's a great vacation spot. This is, as you might imagine, in the Caribbean basin, most post-colonial countries had been, through colonialism, robbed of their natural resources. And so many Caribbean and Caribbean basin countries have turned to tourism, and especially ecotourism now, as a way to bring in revenue. So we're in southern Belize, in a very long sand spit. Let's see if I can get this. Yes. A very long peninsula. It's called a sand spit, and it's referred to as the Placencia Peninsula. Really very narrow in some areas, and it's about sea level or below. So it's beach. It's all beach, and it's become a very popular tourist destination and a popular destination for expats. Who is the guy who invented the McAfee virus, antivirus software? I don't remember his name, but the U.S. was trying to find him because he did something bad, and he escaped to Placencia, and he has a big house there. Anyway, it's a big place for expats, especially from the U.S. and Canada. And I guess you can escape down there and live in luxury. I don't know. But on the west, you can see there is this body of water. It's a lagoon. It's a pretty shallow lagoon. Up in the northern reaches, after it gets kind of pinched off here around the community of Saint Bite, it's very shallow and it doesn't exchange much water with the ocean. So it's got a lot more fresh water and a lot more brackish water in the southern part. And it has a lot of interesting dynamics. It's where there are a lot of dolphins. You can go and see manatee. Because of the seagrass, it's where manatees give birth. There's a lot of fish and wildlife, and it's really been, in terms of tourism, one of the main reasons why people go and visit this area. And then just to the east, just offshore, is the great Mesoamerican Barrier Reef. It's the second longest barrier reef in the world. Lots of coral reefs, lots of keys, little islands that people can go out and do a lot of reef diving and snorkeling. It's a nice place. This is just a bathymetric map showing how shallow the lagoon is. So, I told you this was going to be about wastewater, so we got to talk about shit at some point. And this is the main ways that you dispose of waste on Placencia Peninsula. There's one other way that I didn't show because I couldn't really show any appropriate photos, but some people use what's called a night bucket. And that's direct discharge of effluent from your bucket at night out into the lagoon. So that still occurs in some areas. Soakaways or these pit latrines are common. One chamber or sometimes two chamber, so minimally treated septic tanks, and leach into a very small drain field. And remember I mentioned it's a sand spit, and it's almost below sea level. So a lot of the partially treated wastewater can migrate, obviously, and get flushed, especially during the rainy season, get flushed toward the lagoon and bring a lot of nutrients into the lagoon, which causes eutrophication, lack of oxygen for fish, algal blooms, all kinds of environmental problems from partially treated wastewater. And then there's a couple of more fancy wastewater treatment plants at big resorts. Forgetting, Martin Scorsese has a big resort there. And you can go and you can actually meet him. He hangs out at the bar all the time. You know Martin Scorsese, the director. You gotta ask. Really interesting spot. So all of this came to a head in October 8th, 2001, when Hurricane Iris, a Category 4 hurricane with about 150 mile an hour maximum sustained winds, about 60 mile an hour faster than what you experienced last Thursday, so double what you had, hit Placencia dead on. And it destroyed about 80 to 90% of all the infrastructure, all the homes, and it ended up flooding, as you might imagine, the entire peninsula. So when the floodwaters receded, the entire peninsula was covered in a sludge, fecal matter, that was contaminated with bacterial pathogens that caused widespread illness. And there were a lot of reports coming out from Peace Corps from Red Cross workers that were resident on there trying to help people. So when the government of Belize wanted to build back, they did so really strategically by creating plans to focus on not just more tourism, but ecotourism and green tourism, and everything would be sustainable. And they did this throughout the entire country because if you planned to meet, at the time, your United Nations Millennium Development Goals in a fast-track sort of way, you had a lot more access to resources and international funding from the Inter-American Development Bank and things like this. So this was a strategy that the Belize government used in particular to gain access to more funding in a short period of time. And so they built back through the Belize Tourism Industry Association, all based on really strong discourse about sustainability and going green. And so really important and vital to that was the residents and the government wanted to address the sewage problem, the sewer problem. And so instead of everyone's going to be on their own separate wastewater management system, they're going to integrate it, they're going to centralize it. And they're also going to centralize water. So it's an integrated water and wastewater system that they wanted to implement. And again, because they're on a fast track to give people access to clean water and access to sanitation, they're getting a lot of funding from the Inter-American Development Bank, one of these multinational lending institutions. And it's going to provide substantial benefit to public health, they said, reduce negative effects on the surrounding marine habitats, positive impact on tourism, and removal of those unpleasant septic tanks from your gardens. Who could argue with a sustainable solution like this? Right? I think it's going to be great. So what they did is, not just in this development project, but through all development projects in the country, they started to use LCA, cost-benefit analysis. I got there. You just need to give me some time. LCA, life cycle analysis. If you're familiar with life cycle analysis or life cycle costing, this is a formal computational method. It's software that you use that will help you identify the economic cost of everything in the whole system, process, or product. Everything from the extraction of the raw materials to transportation issues, to the construction or building of the product or the system, to deposition, just every little facet of the life cycle of a product or a process. You can compute how much it's going to cost, economically, but also how much it's going to impact the environment and how much CO2 it's going to produce and how it's going to impact climate change. So the government of Belize started using life cycle analysis on this project and on many projects to do that kind of cost-benefit analysis. And they were going to identify what is the best solution to every problem that we have like this through this life cycle analysis. And by best, I mean what's the cheapest and has the least environmental footprint. Did I get that right, Gene? I'm out of my water a little bit here. Okay. I got to check. And so when we arrived and we started working in the community, we realized that this sort of life cycle assessment is really what we say reconfiguring water-society relations. It's creating, it's the medium through which people relate to water and people relate to environmental services. It's now being computationalized through this computer program. It's really interesting. So now, just for the benefit, I guess, of the anthropologists in the room, I'm going to pull out the theoretical jargon and just try to lay it easy on you. So the research project that developed in this context wanted to consider the relationship between sustainability solutions, that's what this center is all about, right? Sustainability solutions and what we call in the literature technopolitics. You know what technopolitics are? So it's using technology to govern. It's like when the president gets on Twitter and creates policy. That's technopolitics. In the development world, it's creating infrastructure and governing, essentially, through the creation and implementation of infrastructure projects. So we were very interested in how, sometimes, the relationship between sustainability solutions and technopolitics results in the unintended consequence of what we call infrastructural violence. Right? Civil and environmental engineers create infrastructure to improve and safeguard, protect human and environmental health. But sometimes, in the process, it jeopardizes human and environmental health, especially among marginalized communities, environmental justice kinds of situations. So in some instances, we wanted to see, is this project that the government of Belize is pursuing, is there an unintended consequence of infrastructural violence among any of the populations? And it's a really interesting test case because the Placencia Peninsula has not just wealthy expats that live there part of the year or year-round, but also indigenous Creole populations that have lived there for hundreds of years. And it also has Maya groups from the mainland, the Maya. And it also has Garifuna. Garifuna are an African diaspora group that had migrated over from Honduras back in the 1700s. So it's got a very diverse, ethnically diverse profile of people that are situated differently in terms of socioeconomic status. So we wanted to see, can we predict if infrastructural violence would happen to any of these groups versus others? And we had a couple of questions that came from this examining this relationship. So we asked, do communities have to reject much needed infrastructure to safeguard their health and environment from expanding tourism in order to resist the corporate kind of technocrats, the governmentality that follows from this development? In other words, do they need to stand up and say, no, we don't want a sustainable solution because the consequence is going to be we're going to be governed by it. You're going to change who we have to pay, how we have to access water, how we have to deal with our wastewater. All of these things are going to change for us in a sustainable way, but we have to sort of make a social contract with the state. Do we want to do that? So what happens when communities struggle to protect their autonomy? And so much of it is about autonomy of decision-making in the face of state-sponsored tourism development. And then how do these efforts compete with internal or external demands for sustainability? So those are sort of our orienting research questions. And this is what happened. As one of the Placencia residents told us, we'd been lied to. Oh, they were hot and mad when Belize proposed this kind of project. This project was a brainchild of our community. We want this project. However, it seems that the minute money got involved, the people of Placencia Peninsula got tossed aside, and very important decisions were made without our involvement. Right? Because the state came in and said, we did this life cycle assessment. This is the best one for us. This is what we're going to do. Didn't involve any of the community members in decision making. Another resident told us, a community leader, since the changeover, we're still in the dark. We don't know what's going to happen with the money they take away. What's going to be our benefit? Big money clouds people's judgment, someone told us. A local utilities representative for the water utility said, oh, just bite the bullet and put in the full wastewater treatment system. And then residents of the Garifuna community, one said, if you can't afford drinking water, much less a sewer system, how are you going to be able to even afford that? So people were really concerned about loss of autonomy, loss of participation in decision making, but then just what the future would hold with this new kind of system. Pause. Questions. This is like the opening, the context of the story. What do you think? It's complicated, right? Just like Christy said in the movie, a mass of spaghetti. What do you think about the idea of technopolitics? Right? It's sort of like an unintended consequence of creating a design solution. LCA is really useful. It can really help steer you in the right direction in terms of environmental impact. But we've found that when sort of technocrats get involved, these are corporate or government scientists, they can use that as justification for doing the project that they wanted to do anyway. You had a question back here, sorry.
You kind of answered that. I was like, who's behind the technopolitics? Like, it matters, I think we'll get to that. But it kind of matters who's behind making these policies.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It matters. Yeah, question.
What are the cost scale that they're discussing in terms of these new systems being implemented and the money being taken away? Are we talking 10 to 20% of their income tax base heading towards these water and sewer infrastructure plans to the state level, or what's the scale?
Yeah, you sound like an economist. So it's a really rich story, and I've cut out so many of the layers because I'm already over time. But the Inter-American Development Bank gave a $5 million revolving loan to the Belize government that was matched by a grant from the U.S. international aid. And the idea behind this sort of pyramid scheme was you would go and build an integrated water and wastewater system for a community, and the revenue that you would get from charging people would then go partially to pay back the loan And then other revenue would go to fix up another system. And you'd charge more revenue there and pay back the loan and go to another system and then come back all the way around. Well, of course, it didn't work that way. And it's so they had $10 million to start the project, and it would have ended up costing about, I don't know what the estimates were, about 5 to 10% of most people's income to keep the system going. And it's just a rich and complicated story because most people in the African diaspora community were subsidized by the wealthier communities. They didn't pay at all in the previous system to haul away, to have their septic tanks pumped. And now they're going to have to connect to the system and pay. They don't have any money. Infrastructural violence. All right, I'll just go over really quickly the work that we did with engineers and we did with anthropology, and then sort of wrap up and tell you some of the conclusions from this. Does that sound okay? All right. So we worked with the water utility, water and wastewater utility, Belize Water Services, BWS, and we sampled a lot of the water in the lagoon and on the coast for a lot of sort of in situ water quality characteristics, pH, temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and so forth. And then we took a lot of samples back to the lab and looked at nitrates and nitrites. We looked at phosphates. We looked at ammonia, chemical and biochemical oxygen demand. It kind of tells you a little bit about the effect of wastewater effluent on the marine environment. A lot of these, and we modeled them throughout the entire area. So here we're looking at dissolved oxygen, nitrate, and enterococci, and we were able to pick out really the hot spots of the biggest problem areas. And some of these are not associated uniquely with urban areas with septic tank discharges, but some are associated with aquaculture. And I was fascinated to learn that here at UMaine you have an aquaculture program. That sounds very interesting. So a lot of the effluent's actually coming from shrimp farming, and it's shrimp farm effluent. And so we also looked at the percent of exceedance of effluent limitations to find where the hotspot problems were. And we did this also over time because Belize has a rainy season and a dry season. And you can expect more nutrients to be flushed into the marine environment during the rainy season. And of course we did this also with the tourism season because there's a popular tourism season when the area is just flushed with tourists visiting. Flushed, this is a joke. And a time when there are less tourists on there. We also focused on a lot of the urban areas and looked at the frequent exceedance of effluent limits, particularly in the urban areas. We also worked with a local series of local companies, this one's called Eco-Friendly Solutions, that were coming up with alternatives to the state-sponsored design of an integrated system. And in this one alternative, they had started to install on the peninsula some semi-anaerobic biodigesters, where there would be a sludge valve where you could directly access nutrients, or you could let the nutrients through wastewater go into a drain field, and you would have a little garden on top, and the garden would benefit from all the nitrogen and phosphorus and the water that you've recovered from your wastewater. So we looked at the use of a lot of these in the peninsula. We also looked at the use of small-scale pond systems as opposed to some of the upflow anaerobic sludge blanket. Oh, sludge blanket. And found that the pond systems were more effective at removal of pathogens. And that was a big concern after the hurricane. I'm giving Jean a minute to kind of soak this in. Okay, all right. Do we have any other engineers in the room? Oh my goodness. Now I'm really nervous. How am I doing? Doing okay? All right, great. All right, we also had, in the video, you saw Christy Prouty, who was the girl who said, good golly. She does dynamic systems modeling, and we worked together with her on some software called Vensim to do modeling of what we could predict the adoption rate of alternative technologies. And so we were able to integrate our qualitative ethnographic data as turning it into non-parametric data, ranked data, that then we could integrate into this system and calculate probabilities that different stakeholder groups might or might not adopt and eventually sustain these kinds of alternative technologies. and I'll let you read her dissertation. It's pages of this. Now I feel more comfortable. The anthropological research. We did 75 unstructured interviews, 48 in-depth semi-structured interviews, each of these lasting about an hour or so, 161 quantitative surveys, a couple of focus groups, and about 500 hours of participatory observation. So it's a fair amount of research over time. We also used techniques in participatory action research where you let citizens of the community collect data, citizen science, and also a really fun technique called drawing voice. Have you ever heard of photo voice? Where you give a camera to community members and ask them to take pictures in some theme or problem, and then you talk about what pictures they took and why it's important? Well, we did drawing voice with students of all the elementary schools and asked them to draw pictures of where did their water come from? What happens to the wastewater in your community? And we got some really awesome drawings, like this one is my favorite. You can see the septic tank. It rains into the water tank, and it goes into the toilet, and then to the septic tank, and then it goes right out into the bay, right into the lagoon. So we have about 200 of these drawings, and we're going through now and creating a code book to analyze different themes that appear in the drawings to understand different residents' perceptions of the water cycle and the role of water sanitation and hygiene. We also did a very large-scale analysis of all the documents that were produced. The engineering firm produced feasibility studies. The government produced the life cycle assessment study and the life cycle costing study. And a lot of the verbiage in there was about minimizing costs, weighing the costs and benefits. And so we did a text frequency analysis of a lot of this is a great quote. This report gives us the science we need to convince the community to get on board. They were so excited with their life cycle assessment, saying, this is what's going to make the whole world better. So we did a text frequency analysis using MaxQDA, and then a factor analysis, some statistics with SPSS. And we found that the highest eigenvalues were with economics of alternatives, cash flow costs, operational costs, a little bit of environmental impact, and then absolutely nothing, I think, to the hundredths or thousandths place for residents, community stakeholders, anything to do with people. And this kind of contrasted with a lot of the public, we call them performances, that technocrats came to the community to give, that were all about community involvement and we want to hear what you say. But the documents that were being produced didn't really jive with that. Then finally we used this really cool free online software called Kobo, K-O-B-O, and you can download it and create little surveys for cell phones and other types of devices, and we would go throughout the community and hand the cell phone to people, and they would click and check and take the survey. And it was really nice, and you upload it to the cloud, and you can download it in an Excel file and then do some analysis on it. So we did a lot of Kobo surveys, and this one, it's the survey we did last year, and it asked, how do you feel now after all of this stuff that's gone on about a proposed centralized wastewater treatment system? And a lot of people were starting to agree because they were getting convinced over the long haul. And then we would do different kinds of analyses. This is a multidimensional scaling configuration looking at how tourists responded to these questions versus residents. Tourists are like, yes, let's do recovery of resources. Residents were, I don't know. You can see the residents neutral, not sure, some would agree. So this helped us to identify some community capacity building and education programming that we were able to implement in the community about what it means to recover resources from wastewater. And then, of course, mounds and mounds of qualitative data and ethnographic interviews. So some of the quotes that people gave us, one of the big arguments, besides that they didn't want to lose their water board, was that the system's too sophisticated and too reliant on electricity. And what happens if you have another hurricane and we lose electricity on a fairly regular basis? So residents were not dumb about integrated infrastructure. And they wanted to know what's going to happen with these lift stations and pumping stations. As a Sane Bite resident told us, I'm not against anything that would bring money or anything like that, but I'm saying that we need our reef, our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids go out there and we'll expect to see things differently. I want to see my village wake up and start doing something, and you can see some of the problems that they have with solid waste. because it involves the health and welfare of my children. So people were very interested in this idea of sustainability, that you want to curate resources and make them available to future generations, but they were not understanding the sustainability that was being presented by government and corporate scientists. I can pause for questions, or I can do some wrap-up. Any quick questions? I think we're closing in on end of time.
Just about 3 more minutes.
All right, I'll go over this really quickly then. Just again, the idea of footprinting technologies as technopolitical practices. The thing that we found is that when you start to use life cycle assessment to analyze some of these different processes, these different wastewater treatment options, what you do is you make those options comparable, and then you rank them. And that promotes competition among those different kinds of processes. And so it's a way of turning what would be a standard assessment into some type of a technopolitical practice, a governing kind of practice that makes people choose an option, or forces people to accept some type of an option. So we have just a few key contributions by anthropologists on the project. First is anthropology can help discern how to incorporate local perceptions or notions of what's purity and pollution, what's contaminated, what's not, what's safe, what's not, into understanding how people engage with waste reclamation technologies and products. People use locally derived cultural understandings about their biophysical environment to make sense of water and waste and what they believe is culturally acceptable environmental behavior in managing materials like water and wastewater. We also found that people often evaluate perceived risks and benefits of new technologies or strategies against their own cultural models, their own mental maps of reality, especially with respect to the use, management, and meaning of scarce resources such as water. And finally, water and sanitation systems and watershed and ecosystem management can cross multiple communities and be subject to larger institutional arrangements, such as through the Inter-American Development Bank and these other kinds of organizations that link the local to the global at multiple scales, as well as imbalances in the distribution of resources. So, there's me and my kids. The end result, short conclusion, is equitability, not sustainability discourse, promotes smooth infrastructure transitions. Letting people participate in the decision-making process is what really promotes a smooth infrastructure transition. And I'm talking about equitability, not equality, not where all stakeholder groups get to be at the table and have equal weight, but recognizing and being sensitive to the needs of different stakeholder groups. Some might need a higher voice, a louder voice, because they've been disenfranchised in the past. You've got to be sensitive to who is out there and what the social and cultural terrain is to give everybody a truly equal voice. And you can learn more about us again at usfreclaim.org, and a couple of research articles that have come out of this. All of this has been, all of our research is co-authored by faculty and students in both engineering and anthropology. We try to bring that kind of holistic perspective. And my last slide, for those that are interested, you can make spaghetti waffles. I've done it. This is my recipe. And you can take a picture of this and go home and try it. It's absolutely delicious. You can have spaghetti waffles for dinner and experience engineering and anthropology thinking while you're eating this. Thank you very much.